All right, so thank you for joining. Today we're going to talk about Sam's forms and some tricks I think that are helpful to make them look better so that you'll get more response in entering the forms and completing them. Well, let's make sure I'm on this. Go. So, a couple of things that I'm going to talk about today is really, again, always touching on the family portal. What I want to touch on this is a little bit more like style, though, and making sure that you're creating a consistent feel and theme throughout with all the forms that your families are going to interact with. We'll talk about checklist templates to make sure if you're using the checklist for families to upload documents to you, that you're actually using some tools that, again, can be more visually appealing for them. Number 3, form blocks, and I am lovingly gonna pick on Nightlight, only because they have some of the application forms. They're an excellent example of how the form blocks can be used. I tried to look through mine and I couldn't find anything fast enough, but I've noticed that. So I'm going to show that form and talk about how they can be adjusted for, again, legibility so that you guys can see that. I won't be messing with your site in real time, but we'll just I'll show it to you so that it's real clear. It's a clear visual. And then the fourth thing that I hope to have time for is talking about field titles. So a couple of changes that can be made to make the field titles look better on forms, and some different options for styling that you can do for changing the field titles. So we'll kind of start with this. I could not find who this quote was by, if it is by anybody at all, but your style is totally dependent on what your team thinks looks good, right? So just know that, like, I'm not a designer. I tried my best this morning to kind of whip some things up and making it look better, but my style might not be your style. So we'll go with what works for you and what really themes and kind of works out well with your website. I think is going to be really important. So the first thing we'll talk about, like I said, is the family portal. And I do believe it's important to pick a theme. You could totally use a theme coming from and I think you should. It should mirror somewhat your website, right? So just some of the design elements that you have. North Homes was with me last week for training, and their forms, I don't know if Steve's on and if he would be okay with me logging in. I'm going to log into a few more, but his site has his logo rather is a lot of trees, kind of coniferous trees, and he uses that throughout. So I'm going to go into the systems portal. Steve's here. So cool. I'm not probably the best webinar person, but here is, I now know Steve's online, and if it's okay, you can give me a thumbs up, Steve, that we can use your site if you want to share that. But for now, we'll go into my portal and just to kind of look around. So one of the things that I've done is just kind of create a landing page for clients. So the general family portal, I would say, is a form that is a view form that allows your families to kind of have a landing spot for how they access all the other things that you might include. So that could be checklists, it could be other forms, it could be ways to update information. Okay. But having a central spot that's, again, themed, I think is really important. I just kind of threw this in today to ground the user into this page. Another thing that we found out that you can do is use a field for a photo. You could only show one photo, but it is possible to showcase the photo on the forms, which I think is really nice. That even though it says this is me, that is not me, but it is a great looking picture of this woman that is the social worker Ashley Smith for this family's case. Okay, you can see that there. Trying to think if I want to say anything else about this page particularly. Not really. I think some of the other things I want to talk about is the check, and really the second thing is the checklist template. So I've got the families linked to the checklist. And again, trying to keep a consistent theme. I've used these blocks that are that give information to the family. You can certainly take images and you can link them to click away. Okay, so that is possible for you to do, as well as like click outside of this system if you wanted to provide families with more information. So using these blocks and giving them a chunk of information, but presenting it in a way that they'll read it, I think is really useful on the form. So I don't know if anybody was remembered before what our forms look like, but it was just kind of an icon with some text, and maybe they'll read more here because there's an image, even though I would admit very freely that you can't really read this right here. Okay. Let me check in real quick. Okay. Let's see. So, right. And so all the way through the site, I've made it very consistent in order for people to understand kind of what's going on. Okay. This goes kind of with our color theme, and it may not go with yours. So checking into what you can do or what you'd like to do would be important. Let me see. I would like to go into the system so that it can show you where that is. And I'm going to do myself a favor and close all this other stuff. Under settings, in the template designer, you can create templates. So I've actually gone into Canva, which is a free tool that I'll share the link for. It's canva.com later on, and created some images to fill that. Then I take that image and I stick it into a template. I've got my templates that I use on checklists labeled as like family checklist template. So I know exactly how to find them later on, right? If I start naming them all different things, they're just going to fall in line alphabetically at this time. So I'm kind of using a consistency there. All that's on this template is that image. And then when you go into settings under checklist configuration, each of the checklist sections that you've added, when you click this gear icon, at the bottom, you've got client checklist settings. And here you could apply another title to it. Rather than being titled application, it could be like complete your application form. You can offer other instructions if you wanted to keep things simple. Or you can add a template. And this is where you've got access, because this is a family checklist, you can link it to any other or any template that's related to the family or based off the family that's here. Okay. And so I'm choosing the one that I have selected, right? Does that part make sense for SAM users and admins as far as just how to do that? It's kind of, I guess, what is it? A 3-step, maybe probably a 4 or 5-step process is 1, determining your theme. 2, you're going to create a design. You can certainly do that in SAM through the template designer, but I think there are better tools out there for establishing a more consistent design that's just easier to use, like software systems that are just built for design, which we all really recommend Canva. And then you will add that image or create the template in SAM under templates, and then you'll link the template in the checklist section that you want it to apply. That creates this look where you've got messaging here for each section, and it'll show up every time. So if there were more background check sections, you would have the background check, this image repeated for every person that needs a background check. So you have this repeated message for them. Does anybody have questions on that part? It's kind of, yeah. All right. So let's go here. So the checklist templates, that's what we talked about. I also think that you should test your forms in mobile. So I was working based off a question that we had last week of like, what is the right size for mobile. I found a size that was much smaller, is supposed to be the optimal size for images for mobile. I put in a larger image size. This here is more like 700 pixels, and it seems that I still have available space on the output from my mobile phone this morning. But going ahead and making sure that you guys know what it looks like for your families, I think will really improve your experience and the family's experience. Because if you only see it from the administrative side, you just don't have that visibility that you need for what the families are actually experiencing. The next thing we'll talk about is form blocks, and this is where I'm going to access a client site. And just to kind of show you why we would talk about form blocks. So this is Nightlight's one of their application forms. And when we begin the form, get kind of what's called, it's a 2-column layout. And so they're side by side. But right about here, because there is a different title, it starts to throw off the lining up of the fields. Okay, so you could certainly correct that by adding the same formatting here. You might correct that by setting fields to be vertically stacked so that the width isn't as important. Or you might use form blocks, because right about here, right, where you can really start to see that there's a difference. And it's literally only because they've renamed this field to something that's a little bit more friendly for the family to understand how to input that information. I am not going to go into their site. So what I am going to go into is my site, and I'm going to this form here that actually already has form blocks on it. So that is this like medical form. It's set up with form blocks because, as you can see, if I had not created form blocks for it, these would not line up. This current measurements would be kind of tucked up in here, and it'd all be off, and making it just more difficult to read in general for the form. So when you click edit field positions, you get the view that looks like this. There is this somewhat difficult to find, but this is why we talk about it here, is this little like link on the bottom left. And I've already enabled form blocks on this form, so I could disable them, or I can, it will say create form blocks. When I start to get form blocks, I could say, you know what, I'm moving that one down to 3. And Sam now opens it up into a single column. So anytime that you make these changes, reason why I would never go right into Nightlight's site, certainly without their buy-in for it, is because it changes it automatically. Like as soon as you do it, the form is now changed. So it's important, if you're doing these, to kind of do them at the end of the day or early in the morning when families really aren't interacting with the form. So it's, you kind of will make that decision of what's the right time. And then knowing what you're going to do when you're going into them to make them, because you can kind of attack multiple things at once and they can go pretty quickly, or you might kind of plug and play around with them a little bit. But it's pretty easy to use form blocks, but I think it's important, right? Like I wouldn't probably leave this form like this now. This is kind of too far away. I might actually put allergens right up at the top so that we have that information there. That seems more applicable in that spot than an APGAR score. Okay, so that you can kind of play around with, obviously, with depending on the form that you're working on and the information being displayed. Any questions on form blocks? Because it can be a little tricky one to get to. It's more in the customization of it and when you disable or enable that. I also notice, I guess, and I'm not giving you too much opportunity, too much space to ask questions. When you initially add form blocks, Sam sometimes doesn't seem to want to display it right. So it might take a little bit of fiddling around. I have noticed that. So now that I've got blocks, I can kind of move things around. Maybe I want that in 2. Keep this in column 2. Does that part make sense? Is that something that anybody's used? Okay. And I'm going to stick this over in block 2. Cool. Let me see here. Oops. Oh, excellent. Okay, well, Steve's used it millions of times, and that's great to know that it is out there and available, though. But again, because it's kind of in this like hidden spot, if you don't know, you might not know. Let's see. Let's jump back over here to this. And the last thing we'll talk about here is going to be fields. So I've got this labeled as vertical fields because I think that it can sometimes give a nice look for edit forms. I think I prefer it for edit forms to view forms, but depending on the application of your form, you know, it's something to play with, as well as the excuse me, what do I want to say? The wording of the fields. So let me jump into this is their form. I want to go out here to another form. Let me jump in, escape here, and go here to this checklist. This is Nightlight's form. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this form here. Actually, I'll jump into the checklist, and let's look here at the application form. So there's a couple of things that I want to talk about is regarding forms, just really 2 main things. The way that the forms or the fields rather are laid out, this is I don't know what it's called. It's not vertically stacked. The option that you have in configuring is, do you want the fields to be vertically stacked? So I guess like horizontally laid, right? Like it doesn't have an option. It's either vertically stacked or not vertically stacked are your configuration choices. So this is more of a side-by-side view, as we can see. Okay. If I go over here and I edit the form, I could set fields individually. When I click on the field itself and am taken to the configuration screen, I can go to advanced field properties and field title vertically stacked. I can set it as yes. So I can do this field by field. Okay, not great if you have tons of fields, but if you only want some fields, like maybe a memo box, to be vertically stacked, that would be helpful. Where is that field? Did I refresh this? I want to see it side by side. Oh, vertically stacked is yes, and refresh. Let's see if it'll go in there. So I want to knock it. Okay. So, okay, well, that's how you do it. I'm not really sure why Sam's not showing that for me. If I set them, let me slow down. I'm going to go back to the form. I realize that I go really fast with this expectation that you're keeping up, and that's not necessarily true. Under advanced options for public forms, and I think some other forms as well, there's this link that's form display properties. And this would then say all of the fields on this form I want to have vertically stacked. So I'm going to click here. So not just one and field by field, but all of the fields. And I'm going to really hope that Sam shows up this way. Otherwise, I may need to like log out, come back. Here we go. Good. So at this point, they all are. I don't love this. I don't love this look right here. I think there's like too much going on for some reason. I think if I'm finding it kind of difficult to see, but again, this is like that same statement where beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Maybe you find it easier. You might find it easier to see on mobile this way. Maybe there's just too many fields here. Okay. But it's going to be up to you. I want you to know that you have the choice of display. I think this originated out of large narrative fields, like I said, being able to see the full length of the question above the narrative and giving a nice full space so that people can see that. And this particular form this part of the form doesn't lend itself to that. Not sure that I'm going to get, I will get by. Otherwise, field by field and for very specific fields that you need. Like reason for divorce is set up here, but, well, actually all of these on this particular form are as well, all vertically stacked. Okay. But you can see the need for it for a large memo box is very helpful. Let's see if I go back here. The other thing would be, let me jump back to this page, is we've got this internal field title being displayed to the family. It's fine if it's fine. It's not fine if it kind of doesn't make sense. So depending on how you've labeled your families, parent 1, parent 2, provider 1, provider 2, applicant 1, applicant 2, mother and father, whatever your options are, I think having your field titles displayed that way to your families will be helpful for them in entering in the way that you want. So on the configuration form, again, you can always click on the field title and then you can change. There's options here to change the field title for public forms. You can also give hints for public forms. These two options are different than what's displayed internally and what the hint might be internally. Okay. So how your team interacts with a field may be different than the family interacting with that same field. So for first, I mean, if you want their legal name, you might just display it as legal first name because it's shown in a section that is talking about provider 1, right over here. Same thing goes for these forms. If you change field titles, they're dynamically changed, so there's not a lag time in between when it's done and when it's visible. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to say app 1 over and over again, and it makes this extra jargon that's kind of in the form throughout that I think is just unnecessary over and over again. However, on your tables, on your internal forms, it might be actually very useful to see applicant 1 versus applicant 2 there. But for the family, it's not as applicable. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's see then. So here, I think then this kind of concludes my presentation, which is actually looking at the time is getting close to perfect timing. So a couple of the tools that we use regularly is Canva, which you can access at canva.com. Unsplash has got free images. I do think doing some workshopping with your team and your design and brand folks on what is the brand and how do you want to relay that consistently on these forms is a good project to do so that everything seems like it's coming from the same company. And then thank you. If you don't, I will actually open it up if anybody has questions. No. Our next webinar then is on March 11th, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. This webinar will go online, and all of them can be found on inreachsolutions.com/webinars. You can follow us through YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook right now if you've want to make sure you're staying up to date with the latest webinars and things that are coming out from us. And if there are no other questions and there's nothing else, then I will let you go early today, and I appreciate you joining.